I have my buddy Comanche here, and he's in rehab, and we do a lot of work with poles. And I use a lot of poles in helping horses develop better posture, and setting them apart correctly is really important. So I'm going to show you how I space them and how I set them up. So every horse has got a different length of stride, and there really isn't a set measurement that works for every horse. And I don't even have a way to measure out with me because I'm usually just out in an arena with a horse, eyeballing it. But if I walk him through, one thing to keep in mind is what I want the horse to do is to put one footstep in the middle between both poles. So what I'll usually do is walk them through it. We'll go around. I'm going to come around that way. And I'll see where he steps and see how I need to adjust it. With doing pole work is that you don't turn too tight. We start straight, go through the middle straight, and end straight, because that will change your okay. So we'll play around with the spacing there and see if they need to be changed. Might have been a little too far apart. Give that a try. Much better. So if they're too far apart, the horse will hit them and knock them over. If they're too close together, they might skip one and bungle through the rest. So the actual measurement on these, and it depends a lot on your foot. I tend to remember things in foot size. My shoes are 8.5. So these poles are 1, 2, and about 1/2 of my feet. For walking poles, for most horses, it's going to be between 2 and 3 of your foot lengths back to back. So I use for poles just these PVC poles from Lowe's. They're very inexpensive. These ones are screwed into wood stands so that I can alternate the height, which is really nice. But if you don't have those, I've seen people use little children's potties as a cup holder. You can set your pole right on the little potty. I also have these PVC poles, which are just on the ground as is. And behind them, I have telephone poles that I plan to cut into poles as well. And those came free from the energy company. So it doesn't have to break the bank to make poles. So I've set up one exercise here where I have alternating height poles. And on the other side, I have just flat, same distance apart. And again, they should be the same distance apart because you want the horse to be making the same step as they go over the pole. Some of the benefits of going over poles is that you get joint flexion, so the horse lifts and bends the joints in their leg. And then the other one is weight bearing, while this one is coming up. So it's a really good core strengthening exercise. It's a really good joint flexion exercise. It teaches the horse how to unite diagonally across their body, and it teaches them how to loosen their neck and their shoulders. It's just so beneficial for the horse. So it's really important that you have enough poles in order for them to find a rhythm, that they're at a distance that they can keep rhythm, and that they aren't so difficult that the horse has to stop to get over them. So if I raise these too high and the horse has to stop to get himself over, then I've defeated the purpose of the poles. So if your horse struggles to go over the pole, then it might mean that the distance is too wide, they might be too high, there might be too many, or there might not be enough. So it really requires playing around with. But I really like at least 3 and up to 5 poles in order to help the horse learn to have a good sequence of footfalls so that they learn how to be rhythmic to get over the poles. Because rhythm requires that all 4 legs are taking the same length of stride, and that's really what we're looking for when we're balancing a horse, is that all 4 legs are taking the same length of stride. So if they're going straight, they have one foot and the next foot making the same stride. If they're falling in, one of them is quicker and shorter to the ground. What poles teach the horse to do is to make all the legs do the same thing, which sounds so simple, but it really isn't easy. So I'm going to take Comanche over these series of poles. We're going to go over these alternating height ones, and then we're going to go over those straight ones. And again, my rule of thumb is we start in straight, go over straight, and end straight. So I don't want to make any tight turns to get here. So I'm already straight by the time he comes to the first pole. turn too suddenly to get to the next. So if you watch him go over the poles, you'll see his neck get longer, his expression gets softer, he looks happier, even though it's hard work. It's teaching him to raise his front leg and bend his hind leg, either in the air or on the ground. So we step, 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 all the same rhythm. When we try to end straight, you veered off a little there. Good boy, there's a nice release there. I want to make sure I approach this next set of poles nice and straight. So before he's going over them, he'll be ready to be straight. Step, 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 step. So another thing to keep in mind too is as your horse is warming up, their length of stride might get longer, so you might have to adjust the poles a little farther apart as they move. Part of the benefit of going over poles is to teach the horse to lift a front leg and sink down into the hind leg like so, and then to have this leg available to lift the other one. And the reason that we don't want to start out too fast and that we don't want them to be too difficult is we want to teach the horse to be able to do it in succession, in rhythm. So if we make the poles too difficult, then he might get over one and lose a balance to get over the other, and that's not adding any benefit to his body. In fact, it might actually make his postural habits worse. So in human athletics, when we're learning something like a new sport or dancing or yoga, we always start out with the slow foundational footwork of that. So for example, like in yoga, you start out learning how to stand straight, which is hard enough. Then for maybe your tree pose, you learn how to lift your leg and stay balanced in your hips, and then you might turn to the outside. But every variation of that pose, the farther your limbs get away from your body, the more it's hard to balance, and it requires good core control and absolute certainty of this postural stability. So if I ask a horse to go over poles, his front leg gets farther up and away from his body, and that means that he has to learn how to balance on the opposite hind leg. So if my right front is coming up, my left hind has to sink down a little bit more because legs work diagonally. And so if I'm asking him to do too much too fast, too quickly, or too far apart or too difficult, he gets farther away from his center and he's going to easily fall. So again, we actually don't get benefit if we make it too difficult. We get the opposite. So when you're learning a dance of any kind, you learn the footwork, you do it really slow, and then you can add in the spins or speed it up or whatever. But when we're going over poles and we're working on balance and fitness and especially postural dysfunction, and we're trying to help correct that, it's super important that we're getting correct movement where it's possible, and usually that's very slow and very boring and very low.